I'm Kimberly C. Paul. As I travel throughout each state, I realize that death is just a moment. It is how we live until that moment that matters. Finding connection with friends, family, and complete strangers. Journey with me. This is the Live Well, Die Well Tour. So David, it's first of all, we have a mutual friend, Eric. We're at his birthday party, but you have worked with Eric over the past couple of years, doing a documentary, which is fabulous, by the way. But I also want to know, how did you guys originally met, and how did your relationship evolve? Because the way Eric talks about it, it's like you've known each other all your life.
Yeah. Well, one of the amazing things about my work as a filmmaker is that when I get to meet people, I get to go deep right away, or at least I'm lucky when that happens. And it does seem to happen most of the time. So, the director-subject relationship is a special one. We haven't known each other our whole lives, but I think we share a kind of philosophy on what it means to connect deeply and be present. And so we feel as though we've been close forever. And I think, we were introduced through a work colleague of Eric's, Julia Portali. Julia worked at Qualidime, which was Eric's last and in some ways most stable and long-term kind of employment that he'd had in his life. And Julia had known my work from the past. She had worked at a nursing home that I do a lot of video work for and have actually collaborated on a couple of different film projects with. She had had an administrative position there. And when she came to Qualidime, where Eric worked, she, like everybody else who worked at Qualidime, understood that Eric had something special about him, that he was not just a front desk administrator. He was in some ways the beating heart of the company, in how he carried himself and how he connected with people. So I didn't know any of this, but when he was diagnosed with ALS, Julia called me and said, "We have this really special person here at our office, and I think he'd make a great documentary subject." So I wasn't really shopping for a new film project, but I, sounded interesting to me. It sounded like if we could build a team to make the project, it would be worthwhile. And I met Eric, and of course, as you and everybody else who knows him, understands. I fell in love, and it's been a lifelong friendship, even though it's probably only been about 3 or 4 years at this point.
So talk to me a little bit about the documentary, filming the documentary. I mean, it's now on YouTube. And talk to me a little bit about, seeing Eric jump out of a plane versus seeing him today at his birthday party, really totally unable to move. What kind of dramatic effect did that have on you?
That's a good question. I mean, I went into this understanding that he was going to lose function. So this was not like, it's making a film about mortality in this case, and also in all my other work. I wasn't obviously surprised. I think I had created enough of, I guess, emotional boundary is not the right word. It's more just like I understood going into this that these were the terms. I wasn't making a film about him because he was going to be living an indefinite amount of time. So understanding that, I think, framed everything. I mean, it framed how I looked at him. It framed how he spoke of his own experience in conversation with me. I mean, we were not pretending that this wasn't happening or, trying to speak nice about it. It was we were ready to just go deep into what it meant that life is finite and that's where I like to be with my films. And I certainly wouldn't be making films with people who weren't ready to go to that space.
Mm.
So obviously it's sad, of course, to see people that you love lose function. But it was always understood by us that that was what I was capturing. And Eric, I think, really led the way, of course, with his you know, incredibly courageous embrace of his disease and the progressive loss of function. He you know, I never had to push him into any level of acceptance. It was more, I hoped that I could be a witness to this process as it evolved. Um, Certainly with my camera for the sake of the film, but then also beyond the film, to just be present to him as best I could as a friend.
And this is a family affair. You showed up to his birthday party with wife, kids in tow, and it was Eric is unique. We must admit that. There's something about him that gathers really authentic people around him and that tend to have certain values. And what's crazy is that, I met him sort of through you, and then I met you through sort of a friend in Wilmington, North Carolina. And and here we are celebrating his 60th birthday, and he seems beyond joyful. Which he can't move. He can talk and he can move his neck, but other than that, he's totally dependent. But yet I feel like he has more joy than any of us. Do you feel that way too?
Yeah, I mean, I find it, you know, inspiring that he has this, right. I would say a well of joy is a really good way of putting it. He, um, you know, has this incredible ability to just live in the moment. And I think, I mean, I think it's not the disease that did that for him. I feel like I've been exposed to people who, um, a, a life changing diagnosis, a terminal illness reframes things for them. And that's beautiful to watch as well. I think for Eric, it was there before. And I don't think it was always as joyous and as positive earlier in his life. I think there can be some costs maybe as well to living in the moment. I mean, we live in this society where we tell each other all the time, live in the moment, just be in the moment. And the truth is, you can't just live in the moment. We live in a world where you have to prepare for the future, you have to reflect on your past. You're really not living a full life if you haven't. And I think um, Eric and his incredible gift of being in the moment possibly had some challenges earlier in his life as well. But I think he is very well practiced at being in the moment and having this deep well of present tense joy that he can tap into. And I think what's obvious is it has served him extremely well in this extraordinarily challenging time for him.
Yeah, I agree. And you will die as you have lived. And whether Eric went through all this traumatic things in the beginning of his life that he came to this well of joy that he wants to spread it to everyone, it is his story. But talk to me a little bit about putting this film together, the response you've gotten, and how where do you see it going from here?
Well, the film took a long time to make. I feel like I keep saying that after everything that I make because I often make films about people or things that are in flux, that are dying, that are dealing with mortality. And I keep relearning this lesson that you really can't rush that process. So I thought I was going to maybe pop into his life for a short window of time. It ended up being that I filmed him for over 2 years. And then at a certain point, it felt like what I had set out to do, which was to make a film about this liminal space between living and dying. I wasn't going to follow him to the grave. I made that decision very early on. And so I had to sort of be patient until it felt like where I was hoping to end the film had happened. Now, we're at this party where this incredible mariachi band just played. I can't help but sit here and watch this unfold and say, I should have the camera. This is the real end of the film. Of course, in a perfect world, you can film things forever and you can make different versions, but that's not a healthy way for me to live as an artist either. So the decision was made that the film was not about his death, it was about his life, and that it was a short film, and that it would exist. It would both tell his story, his coming of age, both as a gay man and as a father and as a Puerto Rican American living in the United States and finding a home. And it would tell it while living in this liminal space between his diagnosis and the real burden of the illness before it really took hold. And that's why the film is really framed with this device of him jumping out of the plane, because in the face of the void, the end, he chooses life, and nothing really says choosing life like jumping out of a plane. So he, so the film, the process of making the film, I'm sorry, I diverted there, but it was a 2 to 3 year process. I didn't really feel like I was done capturing it for at least a couple years, which is a year and 6 months longer than I thought I would be filming the project. And then it probably took a good year longer to really edit the film. Not so much that I was editing that whole time, but that there needed to be a certain amount of space to really see the story and understand where it started and where it ended. It wasn't immediately obvious that the skydive would be a framing device for the film. And then it was everywhere in the film, which felt like too much. And then it got subtracted a little bit so that it achieved the right tone. What the film has done is a bit of a challenging question to answer. You know, we were ready to premiere at a fairly respected regional film festival in 2020, and the pandemic, like it has for so many people, sort of scuttled our plan. Now, that said, I am really proud of how we pivoted and just said early on, getting this film out there for Eric's sake is the highest priority. This is not about the film. This is not about me and my career. Eric needs to have the experience of watching people watch his story. That, if nothing else, is a bucket list item that I can put on his bucket list and give to him before it's too late. So very early on, I think we maybe spent 3 weeks into the quarantine in March of 2020, wondering how long we should sit on this film and wait for the film festival to be rescheduled. And once that early period of adjustment had unfolded, we said, all right, let's show it online. Let's get it out, and let's find a way to do this. And that gave way to a series of online events that we produced in cooperation with a number of partners for generally disability advocates and ALS people. Those may or may not have been our core audiences ultimately, but they did appreciate the film and help us reach actual audiences in these Zoom events that we conducted. In a brief span of a few months, hundreds of people were introduced to the film. And after that, we sort of waited again a little while. We had this great experience of sneak previewing the film, as we called it, but it began to feel like a premiere, which is what a lot of filmmakers really wait and hope for, and film subjects too. It started to feel like that was getting farther and farther away and might not ever really happen. The film festival that we had been set to premiere at was canceled. We participated in a number of others that went online, but that wasn't really showing a film online is like having it on Netflix. And I have had a previous work on Netflix. It's great. It's exciting, but you also don't get anything from it, really. It's just a deal in the end. And it's a way for people to see your film, which is terrific. But film festivals are such a short window that, did anybody really see it? I'm sure a few people did, and that's great. But what we decided we needed to do was to have an official online premiere. And Eric dressed up in a tux, and he had a virtual red carpet behind him. And we had this amazing event that was just really, really magical in January of 21. And that was the day we put it on YouTube and decided this film should just fly on its own and reach an audience. And I will say, I would have thought at this point that maybe it would have had a little bit more wings underneath it, but it's just a weird time. It remains a weird time where people being exposed to films. I mean, certainly my will to promote the film is not what it once was. I have lots of other projects going on. I'm trying to keep a family alive and healthy through a pandemic. So it's been a very challenging environment, both to put this film out into the world and also to maintain a relationship with a dying friend and also be present to all the other things happening in my life. It's just a very weird time.
But
I'm proud we didn't sit on it. I feel like there are still a lot of filmmakers who might be sitting on films that they made, thinking that the world will come back someday. And I have a feeling it won't. So I took a page from Eric's book and just said, let's celebrate this now.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And when I saw the film, it's beautiful, by the way, the filming of the film, the capturing, the telling of his full story. And what is, as a filmmaker, what do you want people who watch this beautiful short about? What do you want them to walk away with? I mean, that's what I'm interested in. As a semi, amateur filmmaker, it's like, what are my intentions, and what is the story? Because the filmmaker will have their own perception of what they're trying to project in the world with great intentions, but how do you want people to perceive it or even inspire them to do? Because I can tell you what the film has inspired me. I think the film, watching it, and I think I've watched it several times, is we have this moment, and what are we waiting for? And you're talking to someone that is not really a big fan of jumping out of a perfectly perfect plane, but it's one of those things that if Eric can have joy sitting in a chair and still embrace life, then I ask the question, what am I waiting for? It's put in perspective of my own, I guess, daily quirks, daily struggles. And watching this film, it put it in perspective that, what am I waiting for? Because I have the time. Eric doesn't. And so that's what it's done for me. But what was your intention?
Yeah, I try to be careful about saying too much about my intention because I don't want to prescribe an experience for a viewer. And also, I think I've had a hard time answering this question over the years because I think my intention really at the end of the day is to create a space for reflection. I could say that I want people to live in the moment, but that's not really true. Honestly, I think for me, it has its own resonance, of course, as both the filmmaker and as a viewer. I mean, I've watched this film now, 7,000 times. So, I of course want, when I'm directing a film, to be able to have the experience of watching it and continue to find things. And I'm fortunate that I think I work in a way that continues to happen over time. And I can still find, I wouldn't be making the film if I didn't find something in it for myself. But what I find in it for myself, and I work with mortality as a subject, really. So what I find in it for myself is not necessarily what someone else is going to find in it. But I think it has to do with, for me, I think reflection is really, really important. And, I think I struggle personally in my own life with rumination, which is really not the same, and regret. And I think being able to, examine someone else's life that's been observed, hopefully sensitively, hopefully it's been observed patiently, as I intended to do. I think there's an opportunity just to reflect on the choices we make. The way you speak of it, which I really appreciate your sharing that with me. If that experience of considering your daily routine, both what you do and also how you think about your day and how your day unfolds as a result, that's a very gratifying for me to hear. What that might be for somebody else, I wouldn't necessarily want to say. And I think, I'm always in danger of going too saccharine with my films because they're films about people who are dying. And I certainly don't want to make anybody depressed. So and of course I tell people, if I'm sitting next to somebody on a plane or in an elevator that I made a film about a person who has ALS, and the last thing they want to do from that moment on is have anything to do with my film. So, so it's a tricky balance to represent these stories that are real and help people get to the table to watch them, and then also not try so hard for it to be uplifting. For the sake of something being uplifting because people need some dessert after they eat their peas. That's really, I'm trying real hard not to approach my aesthetic through that lens. And this project gave me an opportunity, as they all do, I think I'm getting better at it, to try to just observe an experience and let the weight of mortality exist in the subtext. As well as the hope and the transcendence. We don't always get transcendence. I'm sure you've witnessed that thousands of times over. It's the lucky people who do. But and then there's reasons why people do experience transcendence as well. And I give you a lot of credit for what you're doing in the world because I feel like my films can't get there. But I think with your book and your podcast, you and your life experience, you can take those ideas and you can push them a little bit farther than I can. You can do it more actively in the world. I mean, they're all things that I agree with. Having sort of witnessed, dozens of people die and film those experiences largely, or at least parts of those experiences. But I feel like for the film really to work, it shouldn't push too hard. And and I'm sort of a bit of an anomaly because we're living in a time where activist filmmaking, social issue filmmaking, promoting an agenda through a film is a really popular thing to do. And there's lots of reasons for that. And I don't necessarily disagree with it. But that's not that's not the space that I think allows my films the room they need to really breathe and then hopefully sink deeper into someone's consciousness.
I love that. I sit here as a new friend of Eric's, even newer than you. And how I asked myself this after I got back from Connecticut. It's like, how am I going to grieve him? Am I already grieving Eric? And what is it going to be like for somebody who has this giant soul and personality to die and him not be a part of this world? Have you journeyed in some of that? How are you feeling about a world without Eric?
Well, I'll tell you, I was enormously humbled. And I don't mean humbled in the way that it's like often used of like, I was like honored. I was enormously humbled when Eric said he wanted me to write his obituary. I actually took a step back and said, dude, let's talk this through because I don't think you necessarily know that you want to trust me with this responsibility. And I said, of course I do. And I had to really take a moment and say, wow, this is it's a lot deeper than having just made a film. He's asking me to write his life story. And this was over a year ago now. And I said, of course, I'll do it. Of course. What was your question again?
Right? It gets heavy.
I had a question. This was inspired. Wherever this is going was inspired by your question.
Yeah. The question is, how are you going to feel?
So I realized immediately that I was grieving him already.
Oh.
He asked me to write his obituary, and I began writing about somebody who had died. That was the first mistake I made, because we read an obituary and it's written in the past tense. And I immediately put it down for a month without even really, it wasn't a conscious decision. Just after 3 weeks, I was sending him texts and I called him and I apologized. And it's like, it's really not coming. I said, you know why? Because I'm talking about you like you're already dead, and that's unfair to you and to me. And I said, maybe I'll write an obituary when you die. That's in the past tense. I said, but what's going to help me through this project right now is to write a biography of you. Because I'm certainly aware of the fact that I'm grieving already. It's a process. I mean, you have a finite amount of time left, and I'm watching you lose your physical abilities. And it's harder for us to communicate, and not just because of the ALS, but also because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So the process of losing him is already underway. It's been underway for some time now. I don't know if before you asked me this question, I had actually really grappled with it. But the act of trying to write this biography for him was also a process of living in a world where he's no longer there. That was the thrust of writing it, is that he wanted his story written. He wanted an obituary. I don't know if I've actually written it. I've written a 6 or 7 page single space biography of his life. It was, I would say, even more than the film itself. And maybe there's another film in here. I don't know. It's always dangerous to open this up. I recorded 4 or 5 very long, very intense Zoom conversations with him, where we could talk about all the major chapters of his life so that I could write this biography. And that, even more than the film, I'm so grateful for, because the film, to some extent, you're always keeping somebody at arm's length, or you're looking at them through the barrel of a lens, and it's not as deep a connection as this was. This was very, very intimate, because these were private Zoom conversations that I was recording, but not for the purpose of putting them in a film. And I wrote the biography, and maybe someday it'll be adapted into an obituary. But that process, I think, did bring me very close to the fact that that his dying was real, and that just from a standpoint of grieving, that was real too. It's fairly tricky. I mean, I've heard these stories recently. In fact, it's crazy, but Julia Portali just lost her husband to pancreatic cancer. He had been fighting it for about 3 years. But I mean, she came to me to make this film. We have this wonderful person who's, he has ALS, and within 2 years, her husband got this diagnosis that, obviously he fought, and he had a few more years. But he just died about 2 months ago. And, who could imagine that our fates turn on a dime? But she related during his hospice. She might be an interesting person for you to talk to. She actually started a hospice house in Connecticut, the first inpatient residential hospice care setting in the state of Connecticut.
Oh, wow.
She's worked in healthcare and senior care her whole career as a health administrator. She's a high-level administrator. She's got a master's in public administration stuff. So, she was telling the story about being around her husband Cam's bedside, and he was dying imminently, and they were talking about him, I think in the past tense, and he woke up and said, "I'm not dead yet." So it's really, it's great that we can laugh about it. I feel like you and I can. It might be actually more uncomfortable for most people, but actually that's the reality of it, is that in the very end stages, people don't know how to act. and people don't know how to talk about someone. And I really think it's probably doesn't get discussed very much, or maybe it does in your world more than mine. People are halfway, they're transitioning, even if they're alive, because of what's already been lost. And when you think about, when I hear about the hallucinations and the things that people who are in the very, very end stages see and feel, and sometimes can relate back to their loved ones if they regain consciousness, momentarily, really, they're in a state of transition. So it's not like it's such a terrible thing to have talked about somebody in the past tense, just because if they haven't been awake for 3 days, maybe they are already, on the other side, so, abstracting that a little bit further, I think Eric has actually made us all very comfortable with the fact that he is a little bit living in a couple different worlds, and has been, especially because of how debilitating ALS is, and especially how much he's been sleeping these past few months. I mean, being that it's been a pandemic and I've only been able to visit him this once since the pandemic started, I've had to really learn what his life is like from our correspondence. I haven't been able to really witness it. But it sounds like, he's really lost a lot, and he's really far along, so in a way, we've had to grieve remotely, but thank God the technology really, a million times, it has been a way for us to be together.
Well, I have to put, tip my hat off with you, because being part of someone's legacy is so important. And whether, I don't think this was your intention at all, but I think that's the beautiful part of it. I think this film has become how Eric will live on and continue to be a teacher in the most genuine and authentic way. And you must feel some sense of joy about that, because if anyone has not met like Eric, I'm thinking you've missed out on a certain portion of life. So how do you, closing this interview, I mean, how do you feel about being a part of someone's legacy like that?
Wow. Well, I don't really think about it too much, but to have you clarify that in a way, or frame that for me, give it some context, is it's really humbling, and it's really it really does give me great joy to realize that the works do function in that way. I guess it's something I learn over and over and over again, which is that a film or any work of media, if it's well made, it can continue to live in the present. I don't necessarily always think of it that way when I'm making it, and certainly, reconnecting with projects that are, to me, over is a little like reconnecting with an old friend in a way. And certainly for my direct exposure to the people that I've worked with, including Eric, but also, the really wonderful people that I've made films about who have now passed on. I sort of carry them with me in the present anyway. I know I'm a part of their legacy in a very intimate way because of our direct connection, not so much because of the work. So I don't often actually really ponder, how much the work lives on. And because frankly, a lot of times the works, they don't live on the way I expected them to live on when I was young and I came of age in a world where there was so much less media. But, one of the reasons why I put it on YouTube is because I really think, YouTube or whatever, hopefully YouTube is around. If something ever succeeds, YouTube or whatever, I just think having things on the internet, if you can access it and watch it without a paywall, without having to hunt and dig for something, then it can really continue to be present. And I've made this decision with a couple of my older films. Some of them a couple of them I don't have the rights to do it with, but I put this film that I made, my first real feature, in 2004, about this developmentally challenged man undiagnosed his whole life, who's the water boy for a college lacrosse team. But so much more than that. He's like a spiritual guide, and he's very intelligent, has significant social quirks and difficulties connecting with people, but he connects the way he knows how. And the film is about his relationship off the field with this woman who's dying of cancer, who's sort of his surrogate mom in a way. He sees himself as like a surrogate husband to her because she lost her husband sometime earlier. And, this was in 2004. Her dying was very much a part of the film. I mean, it really is the whole thrust of the film is his process of transition after her life. That film was well received when it came out. It was quickly, kind of forgotten essentially as a work, except for the people who were closest to my subject. But a couple of years ago, I said, this really needs to be on YouTube. I mean, for everybody who knew my subject, Peter, and loved him and helped make the film, it continues to appreciate and value over time. They keep re-engaging with this film and saying, thank God this was made. This is his life. We can continue to experience him and have a relationship with him because we can see him. So it was such a struggle to make that film. It's a struggle to make every film. I haven't figured out a way to make films yet that hasn't been a struggle. And I'll be over the moon when I do. Finally crack the code on that. But that film, which is called Keeper of the Cone, what you said about the work being a living legacy, it reminds me of the lessons that I have had to relearn over and over and over again about Keeper of the Cone, which is that when it gets screened, which is rare, but it does happen once in a while, and certainly when people engage with it in however way they want to engage with it, it does really keep these important people alive as teachers, like you said.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I guess I'll close on this: is have your films being the subject kind of centering and circling around mortality. Has that made you think about your own mortality? Have you seen yourself in your subjects at times?
Always, yes. We'll save this for the next conversation that we have, but I lost my brother very tragically when I was a kid, and I've been sort of considering my mortality pretty actively since then, not always in the healthiest ways. In fact, I think, it was a traumatic loss and unexpected. And I think, I think of grieving differently than people who work in the terminal illness space. Although I've learned a tremendous amount from people who learn to live and work with patients and grieve in the terminal illness experience. But yes, I see myself in my subjects. I see people I know in my subjects. I am always finding something for myself in my own spiritual journey of acceptance of death, in the people that I make films about. I mean, I really, even though all my films are about mortality, I have actually really come a long way in thinking about my films as really not about death at all. And I used to tell people, I make films about death and dying, but it's really not true. It's hard to sell people on this idea, but they happen in a space of death and dying, but they're really about living. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really, to me, if there's a metaphor or container for the films that I'm trying to make, it's that people can ponder death and dying and do in their own ways. I can't lead someone to that table, but what I have control over, I think, and this is most relevant to my life experience, and I think it's in tune with what you do as well, is we can use this experience of death and dying, which is all around us, and have it resonate and reverberate really on these questions that we have about how we should be living.
Mm.
And that to me is what my subjects are always doing and teaching. I think is they're showing us a way to live, and in observing them, they're showing me a way to live. So I think I really do. I like following them around with the camera for that reason.
I love it. I love it. Well, David, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this time. And if there's anything that I can do to support, of course, Eric's documentary that you beautifully have shot, and any other film, you're right. We're in this space, and being around and in this area of facing the end, it really makes you know how and realize how precious this moment is, because it's going to be gone. And like you said, even with your friend, who knows who is going to die before Eric? It's like we forget that we are pretty obtuse to even acknowledge our own mortality, and we have just as many opportunities to die before any hospice patient does. But living boldly, I think, is what Eric has inspired me and many other dying patients is not to waste time. And I believe that through your films, it's showing people who are living really well in the face of also their own mortality. And I think that's something even for us to learn without a serious diagnosis. How do we live like that? Because that's living on the edge to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very bold way to live, because you have to live with an open heart. And I think that's terrifying.
Yes.
It's terrifying for me, but I live in this space, so I have to deal with it, and I force myself to do it as much as I can. But I agree. It's, maybe I could have made this metaphor. Now you've got me thinking about what I could have done better in the film. But, I think, people look for thrills by jumping out of planes or bungee jumping because they want to come to the edge of death, but do it with the safety of knowing that they're not really going to die, and then harvest something from that experience. But to me, it's wonderful that people can do that, I think, and especially if they're conscious of that being the reason why they're doing that. But waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to live this day with an open heart. I'm not going to be afraid to cry if the spirit moves me. I'm not going to be afraid to cackle if the spirit moves me. That actually feels very daunting, I think, to me, and can to other people. And making that choice at the beginning of the day is a huge risk if it makes you feel self-conscious, as it does for like 99.8% of us. And I think, yeah.
It's crazy because, and that's where I feel like I've learned, one of the biggest lessons I've learned from Eric was to look at fear, acknowledge it, and do it fucking anyway. It's like that. I know fear's beside me, and it just is not going to control the radio. It's my radio. I'm the driver of this. But I think in any great adventure, there's fear, and only the grand, explorers are able to live with that fear and do it anyway. And I think that's what Eric is to me, is because ALS has taken just about everything that it could, but it has not taken his spirit. It has not taken who he is. He is laughing his way out of this world and spreading joy as much as he can where he is. And to me, I think that's captured in your film. And oh man, I want to live like that.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you for all these wonderful things you've said about the film.
Oh, I love it.
Thank you for it's so incredibly validating that you're his close friend now, in part because of the film. that you were
Absolutely.
introduced to him through the film. I mean, really, that is an enormous credit, to how the film is working for people that I don't often get the opportunity to see and experience. So thank you for validating the work the way you have.
Oh, absolutely.
And complimenting it, of course, and sharing it as well through this this medium that you have. Thank you so much. I'm very
well, and it was really great to see you and your family face to face, and having, and I look forward to many more future films. And if there's anything that I can do to support you, when Eric, and you're the one when I reached down and said, "Hey, I want to interview about your documentary," and I'll never forget this, David. You said, "I'm not the subject. Here's Eric's. Call him." And I was like, "Holy crap. This was real. That is really rarely done in this arena." And to me, I think that gives credit to who you are. You let your work speak for itself, and I love that.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. And I'm so glad you reached out to Eric. Is that episode available yet?
It's getting ready to air, actually. So I will totally hook you up. And, I might even turn some of this into kind of a part 2 series, and following that, just to kind of sandwich that documentary and promote it again. But then why wait? This why wait docu series is going to be about a 5 or 6 episode where we're journeying. And even because I don't know if you realize, I didn't get to jump out of the plane. The wind was too crazy.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah. So in Denver, I am jumping out by myself, and hopefully Eric is going to be on FaceTime. But I haven't told many people we didn't jump, because I will. It's part of the experience is disappointment. That's life. And then, but yeah, I'm still going to do it.
That's really cool. And I love the way you're framing it as it's still the jump. It might be happening in Denver, but it's part of the same solidarity experience.
Exactly.
And that's wonderful. Yeah.
It's amazing.
They do get scuttled. I feel like, I don't know much about skydiving still. I certainly didn't know anything when I started, but if you want to go skydiving and it's not about solidarity with someone who's dying, then you just go another day. But I can see how that experience of it being postponed may, almost like redoubled your commitment to doing it in his honor and in connection with him. Because it's every time I've gone, it's been for Eric. It's been a fundraiser, and it's been this, fairly deep spiritual experience, for people. But it's probably not always that way for skydivers, for people who want to do it casually.
Yeah.
It do get postponed a lot. It's very weather dependent.
Exactly. But you know what? I think that's part of the story is that, it going to Connecticut and the birthday and jumping out of the plane and making it an event. This is sort of like, now it's intentional, that I could have backed out, but it's like something inspired me to continue on. And I think that's Eric's spirit. And so hopefully, it will happen. And I hope it happens before he dies. But like Eric said, it'll happen when it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Well, look, I know you've got things to do, but it's always great to talk to you. And seriously, if there's anything down the road, we just got to chat to see. I want to collaborate with you, whatever it is down the road. I think that we are on similar paths, but with different, unique talents. And I don't know, there's something interesting about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very open to it. Let's, happy to have a conversation about, whatever seems to be percolating, at the right time.
Exactly.
Send me your social media handles, because I want to keep in touch and
absolutely
and hear about, when it's happening, and, and be able to promote it as well.
All right. Thanks, David. And look, thanks again for who you are, and we'll be chatting soon.
Sounds great.
All right. See you. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, you're the designer. This podcast is produced by Jason Andre with 7 Season Films. If you're interested in telling your story via